Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Naked Truths. Now, we are going to be talking to Vicky Brennan today, all about Dalmatians. And the reason we've started with Dalmatians as a breed, first of all, is because there is some controversy over feeding raw food to Dalmatians. And I thought, well, let's talk to someone who really knows the breed. And did a bit of research, and I found a lovely raw fed Dalmatians advice group on Facebook with thousands of members, clearly people who feed raw to Dalmatians or have wanted to. So that's a really positive sign, I think. And Vicky, you are part of the admin on that group, aren't you?
Yes, I am. There are three of us who do most of the admin on that group, and we, as a group, attract people who have had problems feeding Dalmatians or have been told they shouldn't feed Dalmatians a raw diet, or have had problems with allergies or something to do with the genetic defect they have, which is where they actually form stones in the bladder. And all Dalmatians have that. All Dalmatians have the genetic defect that means that they all form stones in the bladder, so they need to have a special diet. So coming into the group, and you might have noticed, it sounds like everybody in the world who has a Dalmatian has a problem. But actually, of course, 99% of people are feeding a perfectly well-balanced raw diet to Dalmatians, taking into account the things that have to be managed or controlled because of their genetic defect. It's a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. If you run a group like that, you get a lot of people with problems. There are not as many problems as it looks like there are.
Okay, so this is what we use Facebook groups for. I must just shout out as well about this light. It does flick on and off. I actually forgot that when I sat here. So sorry, everyone, if you're wondering why I'm suddenly in the dark and suddenly in the light. We do have a bit of a flicking light here. So Vicky, how long have you been involved in the breed of Dalmatians?
I got a Dalmatian, my very first Dalmatian, in 1994, so quite a long time. And at the time I was doing agility, so I was very keen that I'd get a breed that was good with my small children, that was athletic and wanted to do stuff, and hopefully would do agility. What I hadn't realised at that time is that there was a group being formed that was interested in carriage dogs, because Dalmatians are carriage dogs, they're bred to follow. So I got very involved with all of that too. So since 94, when I started, I've really tried to promote the breed as a sports dog, as a carriage dog, as a family dog, because people sometimes think that they are a big dog and can be a bit awkward with children and things, and actually, of course, they're not. They're as good as any other dog that loves to be a family dog. And they are couch potatoes, you know. These couch potatoes.
What we've got here.
They are couch potatoes. They love to sit and cuddle. They think they're lap dogs. So, you know, as a breed, I was quite smitten having got my first one, and I've had many since. I've still got three, and three other dogs. But the Dalmatians have a particularly special part in the family.
Yes, yeah. Oh, they are super dogs. Yeah, I used to dog sit for one called Henry many years ago. He'd be long gone now, bless him. But yeah, oh, absolutely super. I remember he did need initially quite a bit of training when he was an adolescent, but, you know, it was a super dog, really responsive, and, you know, didn't have any recall problems or anything, I don't remember. So yeah, very friendly.
Well, they are, I mean, they were bred to follow the carriages. In America, they used to sound the alarm for the fire brigade, and they used to go ahead of the fire engines, so they were known as fire dogs.
Yeah.
So they're actually quite vocal, can be quite protective. So the training you talk about from a Dalmatian's point of view is all kind of front loaded as a puppy. So making sure they're properly socialized, making sure that they are happy for people to come and talk to you, because they do get protective, making sure that they get on with other dogs, So we do a lot of socialization at the beginning, but you know, they're big soft dogs and they like to join in with what the family's doing, really.
Yeah.
They're not, I mean, they were originally bred, they would stay out in the kennels and they would kill vermin and guard the kennels and guard the horses and the carriage and things like that. So they are quite guardy dogs, but actually they wouldn't live outside very happily in this day and age, I don't think. They really don't want to do that.
I think most breeds are quite used to their creature comforts now, aren't they?
Absolutely, yes.
So let's start from the beginning, okay? Somebody gets themselves a Dalmatian puppy, may even be for Christmas this year. Dog is for life, not just for Christmas. However, it does happen. A puppy comes into the household. 8 weeks, 9 weeks, maybe. Was even let's go there that this dog was on kibble with the breeder, and the new guardian would like to switch the Dalmatian puppy onto raw. So let's start from there. Any top tips? What should people be looking to do?
Well, anything that comes into my house is fed a raw diet from day one. I mean, I've been raw feeding for 30 years and I won't have kibble in the house anymore. It just doesn't suit me. But a lot of people feed both. That's fine. But we recommend you start with a single protein, even with a puppy, and feed a single protein for 3 days. So something like green tripe is ideal. It's very digestible and it's full of probiotics, and it's very good value for a Dalmatian because it's what we call low purine, not low protein, low purine. And the purine level is key for this stone forming issue that they have. So we feed tripe for 3 days. If it's an adult dog, you'd say 7 days, but 3 days for a puppy. And then I think very quickly, you know, you need the poo to harden up. So we give them something that's got bone in it.
Yep.
Chicken's a common one. So if you can get chicken with minced bone, that's perfect. And then as you go through probably another 3 days, you might add a different protein. And it doesn't mean you have to feed 3 proteins in one bowl. It's one of the misconceptions we often get. It just means that, you know, one meal they'll have tripe, the next meal they'll have chicken, and the next meal they might have beef.
Yeah.
So we try just to keep the actual, not sure that's you or me.
You know, I don't know.
Try just to keep the balance right with the amount of bone to keep the poo the same. But that's the same with every breed. The tricky bit with Dalmatians is to keep this purine level down. So they can have beef, chicken, duck, turkey. They can't have any offal. So they can't have, by offal we mean secreting organs. So they can't have liver, kidney, brains, testicles, you know, all the other kind of bits you might find in a normal, what they would call a complete mix. So, I mean, I'm not particularly a fan of complete mixes in that you don't know exactly what's in it. If you've put the food into the bowl yourself and added whatever else you need to add, like egg or veg or oil, something like that, then you know exactly what went into it. The mixes that are typically sold for other dogs can be what they call 80-10-10. So it's 80 meat, 10 bone, because this is percentages, 10% bone and 10% offal, and that's of no use at all to a Dalmatian. No. You run the risk then of them forming stones. Yes. A little bit like people with gout. So we use the human gout tables to give us an idea of what you can feed and what you can't. Other meats can be high purine. Lamb's quite high. Oily fish is too high. And kangaroo is too high. Right. So we have members from all over the world. We're the only group doing what we do. And we have a lot of people from Australia. And obviously a lot of their dog food includes kangaroo because it's kind of freely available. Yeah. And it's something that is to be discouraged. So we start with a simple single protein. We add in more proteins. We feed an egg a day because the egg contains a lot of the nutrients that you would find in liver, for example.
Right. Okay.
It's a good, well-rounded protein to feed. And also we add things like green leafy veg, so that helps with some of the vitamins that they don't otherwise get.
Yeah.
I don't feed a lot of veg to mine because I've only got one HUA, so she has all the veg. And I've got a couple of the others that won't eat veg. So, you know, it just depends on what they need. And one of the advantages of feeding from scratch without using a pre-made mix is that you can choose to feed the dogs what each individual dog would need. So some of them need a bit more fat, some of them don't like the veg, some of them love the veg. My HUA would kill for a courgette, you know. So it does depend on the individual dog and the individual dog's requirements as to exactly what I feed. But when people start to feed individual proteins and then add another protein, they are in a good position then, should something go wrong, like the dog should show signs of itchiness, to stop what they're doing, take that protein out and roll back to where they were when the dog was comfortable. Absolutely. A lot of people with dogs with allergies come to us, so it can be quite an issue. I've never had a dog with an allergy. I know of nobody else that's had a dog with an allergy personally. It's just that there are a lot of people that come to that group because they have dogs with allergies. So again, it's kind of self-selecting.
I think that's across all breeds at the moment. It seems to be quite prevalent, to be honest with you. So, yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking in terms of Dalmatians, solely Dalmatians, are you sort of, how are we getting in like our vitamin D? Because of course your first thought is fish, which is high in purines, or the liver. So would you be encouraging people to use eggs for that, or how are you going about that?
Yeah, I mean, eggs are a very good substitute. You know, the dog sat next to me has never been able to have liver. She's stolen the odd bit, because I used to have a dog, so actually a Kelpie, that didn't like liver. He was allowed liver, but he didn't eat it. In fact, he wouldn't eat out of a bowl that had liver in it yesterday. You know, he was so picky. Yeah. And she would pinch his liver. Now, that's fine because it's a one-off. You wouldn't choose to feed it, but also the other dog that didn't like liver didn't suffer from not having it. You know, we lost him earlier this year. I think if you look at human diets, for example, traditionally people were told, you know, prior to everyone being vegetarian and vegan, that they should eat offal in their diet. Yeah. How many people did?
Oh, I was forced to as a child.
Yeah, and I can't stand liver, and most people don't eat liver. So
I think I probably quite liked it, just the thought of eating it, I think, when you're a kid, you know.
Yes, yeah. Well, my mum used to cook tripe for the dogs in those days. It wasn't green tripe, it was from the butchers. And I used to like to sneak some of that. So we're very strange as children, aren't we?
Oh, revealing all your dietary secrets. Oh. Yeah, I'm thinking if you can sort of explain a bit more about the purine issue, what would people see as symptoms? Because I mean, I'm wondering whether there's a certain amount of people that may get a Dalmatian that wouldn't know this. So what symptoms would start to show initially if
that's a very good point, because actually there are a lot of breeders out there who don't understand it.
Right.
So you'd normally expect to buy a puppy and it would come to you with, you know, a set of instructions and some food to give it and a piece of bedding and all the other things that people normally do. But particularly during lockdown, people have bought dogs just to breed. Right. And we've had a lot of puppies being bred from unregistered dogs, which means you've got no history of health checks. Dalmatians also suffer from deafness, which is quite common. And you also end up, you know, with people, you know, not believing it or not taking it seriously and so on. So I can't remember your original question now.
It's symptoms. I'm just
the symptoms, yeah. So it's not going to happen overnight. It takes a long time for the stones to form in the dog's bladder, all of the what we call HUA, high uric acid Dalmatians, form crystals. Now, for example, you can take a dog to the vets and say, you know, it's got a urinary infection or something, and the vet will have a look and he say, oh, it's got urate crystals in its bladder. We have to put it on a special diet. And actually, they all have urate crystals in their bladder, and the vet should know that.
Right.
But typically, the vets don't know that because clearly they're not familiar with every breed. But you'd hope they might go away and look it up. They don't. And the dog ends up on a prescription diet, which is utterly unsuitable for an active dog. You know, they get fat and they don't look good. So the main symptom that you would see is that the dog is struggling to urinate. It won't normally happen in a puppy. It will normally happen in a dog that's a year old or more. And if you ever see a dog that's struggling to urinate, then it's a veterinary emergency. It wouldn't, you know, it could be a different breed of dog, but it's a veterinary emergency because clearly the bladder will burst and you will end up with a dog that's sick or dead. So we always say the minute you see your dog struggling to urinate or they have blood in their urine, then it's a veterinary emergency. And you see people say, oh, well, I'll contact the vet in the morning. No, you contact the vet now. And they say, oh, well, there's no ER vet around us. Well,
find one.
Find one, yes. Bang on everybody's door, you know, on the phone clearly, but bang on everybody's door and make sure that somebody will see them. And what they'll do then is they'll catheterize the dog to empty the urine, and then they'll normally do an MRI scan to see what's in the bladder. Some vets will try to x-ray, but they don't show up on x-ray. And again, the vet should know that, but they don't always. So if you get a mixture of stones, or the stones are covered in what we call struvite, which is the kind of stone that sometimes forms if you've got a UTI, then that will show up on x-ray. But the actual pure urate stones don't show up on x-ray.
Okay. And can they be removed easily if your dog has these?
Well, if they're small and they can flush them out through the urethra, then they can be removed. If you feed allopurinol, which is a drug which helps to break down the stones, sometimes they can be broken down, but it all depends on how big they are. And normally it's a veterinary emergency that requires the dog to have the stones surgically removed from the bladder.
Okay.
And very often, because the urethra is obviously a teeny tube, then the stones can block in the tube, and then you really are in trouble. So what they do then is to make another exit for urine out of the bladder behind the dog's penis, and that will remain open basically. So they pee through a different hole.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And that's not a great outcome for the dog, but it's a success in terms of stone formation, because they will then be able to wee. Bitches are less inclined to get stones that block, because they form stones just as readily, but they don't have the same plumbing. So the risk is lower. It's not zero, but it's lower in a bitch than it is in a dog. So one of the things we also advise is that you keep your dog entire until it's at least 18 months to 2 years old, so that all that plumbing is fully developed and fully formed. And then once, if you need to have them castrated, which a lot of people would choose to do, then you are leaving them in the best position to be able to clear the stones, because the stones to start with are teeny, and they will clear out through the urethra up to a point. It's when they start to get a little bit bigger that you've got a really big problem.
Yeah.
So that's where the low purine diet comes in. But the other significant management tool we have is hydration.
Absolutely.
So water in every meal. I put about a cup of water in Gemma's meal every time. Slows down their eating too. But also, if you have a dog that doesn't naturally drink a lot of water, then there are many of our members that will put like a stock into the water to make them drink, or put milk into the water to make them drink, or yogurt stirred in. We feed cottage cheese quite often as another different protein where we can't feed liver. Right. And the cottage cheese can be stirred into water. And Dalmatians are greedy on the whole, and they'll eat anything that looks vaguely like food. But the bone broth is a favourite for certain.
Yes, bone broth would be the top choice. Yeah, sure.
You need to make your own, because if you get it, from the supermarket, it tends to have salt in it and things like that.
Often it does, or onion.
Or onions, yes, absolutely. And onions are another thing that we wouldn't want.
I mean, we have bone broths, actually, a naked dog, which obviously they're suitable for dogs, so that's an option. So yeah, I mean, it's interesting to think about, how did they cope with this with kibbles? Because we haven't had breed-specific kibbles in the grand scheme of things. We haven't had them that long.
Oh, and numerous kibbles, and even raw food, or commercial, freeze-dried and cooked wet diets and things like that, put Dalmatians on the cover to advertise them, but it's not suitable for Dalmatians. We see it all the time.
Yeah.
Also with additives and things like that, where they've used things like green lip mussel, which is again a very high purine ingredient. They put a Dalmatian on the pack.
Yeah.
So you do have to be really careful, and certainly with kibble. See, I'm getting into difficult territory here, because I'd say kibble's not suitable for any dog, but that's just me.
Yeah.
But if you look closely at the ingredients on the kibble, it says things on it like beef liver. That's easy. You can't feed that. Or yeast is extraordinarily high in purines.
Brewer's yeast.
Yes.
Right.
So if you've got brewer's yeast in it, that's higher than liver. So if you use something like, we use something called the Acumedia chart, which has all the purine levels in it, which is used for people with gout. And that has yeast at the very top of the list. So that's easy. But if you look at ingredients in kibble, it often says things like chicken meal.
Yeah.
Or animal derivatives. Doesn't tell you what those are, but you can be fairly sure that it's got stuff in there that you wouldn't choose to feed, such as offal, because offal's cheap. Generally, offal is cheap, so it's used as a cheap ingredient. So it's really difficult to find a kibble that's suitable. And we those people that understand the kibble thing will offer advice on suitable kibble on our group. We don't ban anyone for talking about kibble. We don't tell anyone they can't feed a mixture of kibble and raw, because they can. People do it very successfully.
I think the key is that this isn't actually a raw feeding issue at all, is it? This is a problem that Dalmatians have, and it doesn't matter what you're feeding, it needs to be considered.
Yes. And it's important really to understand it, because the main things you can't feed are secreting organs, oily fish. So a lot of these completes include oily fish. Oil is all right. So you can feed salmon oil, because there's no protein in salmon oil. It's pure oil. And purine is a protein, so you can feed the oil but not the fish. So you can't feed secreting organs, oily fish, or yeast. Many of the so-called complete raw diets include yeast.
Well, I haven't seen it in many, but yeah, maybe.
Some of them do, yeah. And you just think, what a shame. And you see the raw diet companies advertising that they have veterinary people there, and they have nutritionalists on their a payroll and things like that. So when you phone them up and you say, I've got a Dalmatian, so I can't feed these things, can you recommend me one of your products? I say, oh no, you have to feed liver. Or no, you have to feed yeast. Or it's okay, it's not got much yeast in it, so it won't be very high purine, but it's such a high purine item that it does influence the whole of the feeding.
Well, you certainly don't get that if you got me here. This is why I've been wanting to do this video, to really get the truth out there, because this idea that I hear, oh, Dalmatians can't eat a raw diet. Well, this is what I'm sort of alluding to with my question before, that it isn't about raw. They can have a raw diet, very successful.
It's better for them to have a raw diet because you know what's in it,
and the hydration content will always be greater in a raw diet.
I mean, I struggle with it when we hear that, because we get a lot of reports on the Facebook page, obviously. I struggle with it when we hear that vets say, oh, you've got stones, you have to feed a prescription diet. But it's dry.
Yes.
Our number one defense against these crystals forming into stones is to flush the bladder.
Yeah.
So feeding a dry diet, I cannot even begin to imagine why that sounds like a good idea.
Exactly.
I just find it really difficult. So a raw diet is infinitely preferable, in my opinion, to feeding any kind of kibble.
Yeah.
Specifically to Dalmatians, because you're feeding something that's got a high water content. I mean, the water content in meat is 80%, something like that, 80-90%. So you're feeding something with a high water content. You can add water to it because, water added to kibble, some dogs just won't eat it because it just looks like mush. But you can add water to raw food and it just makes a gravy. And it's important also to make sure they have enough wee breaks. So people that go to work all day and don't have anyone go in to let the dog out at lunchtime means that sediment is sitting in the bladder for many hours, whereas really you want to flush it through and get the dog to drink more and then flush it through again, so it's about management. I mean, that's the whole dry diet thing to me is very strange. And I always feed mine from scratch. So because when I started, there were no pre-mixed raw diets for dogs. You just went to the abattoir and got a whole tripe, a whole stomach, and you cut it into bits and you fed it to the dog, And I used to get lots of things like chicken wings and so on from the food industry. But I would go to the food industry suppliers and get it. It didn't come from a dog food shop because dog food shops sold kibble. I mean, kibble's a very new invention. Kibble's only been around for a very short period of time. Dogs have evolved over hundreds of thousands of years.
Exactly. Yeah.
And they've managed perfectly well without kibble. And yet you talk to some of the vets, you think you couldn't possibly feed a balanced diet, whatever that is, to a dog unless you feed it kibble. I mean, a balanced diet's not a thing. It's not a single thing. It's a bit like us, you don't weigh everything you put on your own plate or your family's plates. You have a bit of protein and a bit of veg and a bit of carbohydrate. And sometimes you might eat pizza. Well, that's probably not got the right balance at all. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to the dog either. So you're feeding a diet that's got variety, that's got several different proteins, because that gives you a balance across the diet over time. And you feed some bone and you feed eggs and you feed, but you don't have to feed it all on the same day. You might feed eggs every other day. You might feed bones in the morning, but not in the evening. It doesn't matter. So it's just about providing variety, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think the biggest thing with feeding any kind of fresh food diet, even if it's lightly cooked or raw, is the trust, because you're never going to have 100% certainty. You have to trust. You have to. And that comes with time. I mean, I've been raw feeding for 25 years as well, so I'm the same as you. Like, you actually stop looking for ultimate balance because you start to understand more about how the body works holistically.
And there's no such thing really as an ultimate balance. It's you know, our own diets, human diets. There are people that don't eat any veg. There are people, I mean, you know, guys tend to be less inclined to eat veg, don't they? You know, there are people that won't eat any veg. There are people that don't eat any meat. There are people that don't eat any animal products, but they manage to give themselves a balanced diet. And we're often asked, for example, oh, well, you know, if you're not feeding kibble, you need to include some supplements. Why? You know, there's no need for a supplement if you've got a balanced diet. It's better in the food. One of the problems with things like supplemental kibble is that they're fed in isolation. So if you have the ingredients that and the chemicals that are naturally occurring in the meat, then it's in the right balance with all the other things, and you also have all the micronutrients in there. So if you rely on kibble being a balanced diet, that only has to meet a very small number, a small amount of criteria, which is put up by the food industry, because kibble typically was just floor sweepings originally, wasn't it? So so they have to have so much protein, so much magnesium, so much vitamin C or whatever in it, but it's added afterwards. It's not embodied in the ingredients themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
You often hear about them, don't you? It's cooked to such a high temperature that they have to add the vitamins and minerals afterwards.
Yeah.
So they're not in the right format for the body to make best use of them. And in a raw diet, they are. I think that's where you get them. Sorry.
It's everything's working synergistically with a raw diet. This is what we forget. You know, it isn't a set amount of nutrients that you're getting, and that is part of the benefit for it, you know. So going back to purines, how much is too much? Because obviously we could panic. You were just mentioning before that, you know, one of your dogs would steal a bit of liver from the other one and you wouldn't worry, you know, because it's just a one-off. So when do we draw the line in terms of how much is too much?
Well, if we always refer to the Acumedia charts. We've actually got a lot of different charts that we use. And they all give slightly different amounts, and actually you'd have different amounts in grass-fed beef than you would in stock that's reared in an intensive farm and that kind of thing. And we don't quite do that here, but they obviously do in America. So we pick a number of 150, which is a low medium number for the purine level. It's 150 milligrams per 100 grams of meat or something like that. I can't remember quite what that number is, but it's 150 we use. So if you feed 165 occasionally, that's fine. If you look at liver, it's 700 and something. If you look at yeast, it's in the thousand, it's over 1,000. So we try to stick to this 150 figure, which means that you can probably include 10 different meats if you wanted to. That will come into that level. It's just avoiding the ones that are particularly high. And it forms over time. So you get people that take on a rescue dog because the people that own it have not understood the requirement. They find that this rescue dog has got a serious bladder stone problem. And it's come up in later life because obviously it's been forming over the time. That in some ways, the bigger the stones, although they cause irritation, they don't cause the same blockage as the kind of just right to fit in the urethra type stone. So, you know, sometimes you find they've got stones and actually they're fine. Other times you find that the stones are causing blockage and you've got a real serious problem. So it's better to avoid all liver, all kidney, all oily fish, and all yeast, and to look closely at the other ingredients that you're using. I mean, the other one, hello.
Oh.
That's Hazel.
Say hello.
Hazel carries the LUA gene, and the LUA gene is the low uric acid gene. But yeah, so we don't feed any of it because that's a safe option to take. Some people will say, oh, I always give a little bit of liver. Sometimes we feed salmon because it's one of the low purine oily fish, lower purine oily fish, but then we just feed it once a week. We don't feed it on a regular basis.
Right. Okay. So yeah, you mentioned about this breeding and the genes, and so have you tried to find answers within breeding of Dalmatians then to this?
Well, yes, because all Dalmatians carry 2 copies of the high uric acid gene. Every Dalmatian in the whole world has this uric acid problem and will form stones in the bladder.
Right.
About 45 years ago, an American breeder bred an English pointer into his line of Dalmatians.
Okay.
And then because the English pointer carries 2 copies of the low uric acid gene,
right,
it meant that every puppy in the litter carried 1 copy of the LUA gene and 1 copy of the HUA gene.
Right.
Now, because the LUA gene is dominant, none of them had this problem.
Wow. Okay.
So he then bred those dogs to more purebred Dalmatians. And I mean, we're getting into maths and genetics now, but it meant that because the LUA Dalmatians carried 1 copy of each, then there was a 50-50 chance of them passing that on into the next generation. And typically you get half the puppies in a litter when you've used an LUA Dalmatian to an HUA Dalmatian that carry the LUA gene. I mean, nature's not that kind. So sometimes you only get 1 or none, and sometimes you get more. I've got a dog who's got 2 copies of the LUA gene.
Right.
And that's quite unusual in Dalmatians.
Yeah.
Which means that every puppy he produces, a bit like going back to your English pointer, every puppy that he produces will be LUA.
Okay, so it is possible for a dog guardian, a Dalmatian guardian, to be sitting with a Dalmatian that doesn't have this.
Only if it's been specifically bred.
Right, but they would probably know that, wouldn't they? Because
they would know that. In the UK, for example, they would definitely know it because they're all traced and they're all certificated. They've all been tested, and they've all, been bought specifically because they have the LUA gene.
Yeah.
Now, in America, there are more of them because that's where they started. And they have dogs out of rescue. They have dogs that have been bred from LUA dogs. Nobody knew they were LUA. So it's different in the States. You can get a dog, and it is then worth having it tested to find out. In the UK, there just aren't enough of them.
Yeah.
And they are all a bit special. So we don't lose track of them in the UK.
Yeah.
But, I mean, what possibly isn't obvious to us dog people is the politics behind that, because you've put an English pointer into a purebred Dalmatian line, and there are schools of thought all over the world who treat LUA Dalmatians as mongrels.
Oh, yeah.
And they don't want to breed LUA puppies because they consider them to be poorer quality.
I see.
Now, for a long time, they had not quite such clear spots, and Gemma, you're pushing. Not, but now, because there are so many generations down the road now, that the amount they are genetically a pointer is, 0.0001.
Yeah.
It's a teeny amount, and the British Kennel Club, our own kennel club, accepted the breed, the LUAs as purebreds a few years ago now. So they are registered as purebreds, but for I think 2 or 3 generations, you had to have a star by their name if you showed them, to show that they were a crossbred originally. But we're talking 45 years ago.
Yeah.
So we're talking potentially 20 generations on, and it's quite hard to show you at the moment because Gemma wants her tea really. But if I turn you around here, you can see Gemma there.
Yes.
And Hazel. And that's Hazel. Oops, hang on a minute. That's Hazel. Now, there's nothing wrong with Hazel's spotting at all.
No.
And Gemma's got too many spots, but actually, you can't tell anymore that they are part of the LUA breed. There she is.
Yeah.
I did all that trouble to try and show you, and now you're here.
Ultimately, we're here for the health of the dogs. We love our dogs, and we want them to live long lives. I think this is something that I've heard about in various breeds as well, where there's health issues that aren't necessarily being bred out as they maybe could be. So it sounds like in 45 years, you could have made a huge difference in terms of the LUA dogs coming through.
Yeah, not in the UK, because like I say, it's only, I think it was probably only about 10 years ago that they were accepted by the KC. But if anybody's interested, you can look up Fiona Dalmatian, because Fiona was the one that came to the UK to bring the gene, and she's on Wikipedia, and it tells you the story on Wikipedia.
Lovely. We'll link that, actually. Why don't we link that from this interview? It'd be nice.
And the breeder who imported Fiona, she only came over here for a few years, and then she went back to the breeder in America. It's called Julie Evans, and Julie Evans, like Hazel. So Hazel is a Julie Evans puppy.
She's super. She's super. I've got my very unspotty dog that came and sat down next to me in the middle of the talk.
They're all just mithering because it's tea time.
Yes, this is it. Okay, well, I'll let you go because this has been absolutely fascinating. And if there are any other questions to answer, I will tag you and maybe send people towards a group. That's another option. So if you've got any questions for Vicky about your Dalmatians or about raw feeding Dalmatians or what to feed, purine levels in different food types. Now, you have mentioned a chart a couple of times, which the names escape me now. So do you want to just mention that again? It began with A.
That's the Acumedia chart.
Okay. Let's post that word so that it's discoverable on perhaps. And
I mean, that's also linked from the group, and the group has half a dozen other charts. I mean, if you want peculiar things and lots of different kinds of fish, the Japanese chart is brilliant for that. Okay. We get lots of questions about fish that we don't know about in the UK. Okay. So we can find quite a lot of useful information because we deal worldwide on some of the charts that are not as mainstream, really. Okay, great. All right, thank you. Well, I hope you've enjoyed today's chat, the truth about feeding Dalmatians. You can feed them raw, absolutely. It is possible. It just needs a few tweaks in the diet, really, and some education from lovely people like Vicky. So do do come back and watch another Naked Truth series. We have lots of episodes actually coming up, including first aid for dogs,
we're chatting with a lady about using essential oils for dogs as well, and the safety about using essential oils for dogs, and many others in the episode. If you check out our Facebook page, Naked Dog Facebook page, then you'll be able to see a lot more information about the episodes we've got coming up. So I'm going to wrap this chat up. So thank you, Vicky, for being part of this and for talking to us for nearly an hour. Although if you're anything like me, then chatting about dogs is your favourite subject.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity. And yes, I could talk on this subject forever.
Exactly. Okie doke. All right. Okay. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Thank you very much.